East Asian Primary Sources for a 21st Century Classroom by Aaron Botelho. Okay, so a little bit about this project. So I'm already a history professor. I'm coming back to school to learn some East Asian historical material so that way I can expand my portfolio and hopefully eventually teach it one day. So when we were given this assignment, I did it with an eye toward eventually teaching. And so the fact that we were going to have a chance to look at primary sources, I determined along with our professor that I would design some future class lessons with it. But I wanted to do it with some of the latest educational theory in mind. So that is the background behind this. And so what I want to do is I want to look at some of that theory and how it informed the way I designed this particular assignment. So traditionally, in a classroom, teachers have stood up at the podium and have lectured. They've been aided in this with a textbook, and together the two of them traditionally have sought to get facts into students' minds. All right. So this is the traditional model that probably most of us grew up with. This is sometimes referred to as the sage on the stage. The teacher stands up at the front of the class and is authoritative, and with the aid of his textbook, transmits information to students. Underlying this is the idea that there are certain facts that students need to learn to be proficient at that particular subject. And that facts can just be transmitted from the teacher and into the student's head. All right? Where at some point in the future, they may need these facts and they'll be there waiting for them. This is sometimes referred to as the attic theory of cognition. The same way you keep things that you might need later in your attic, well, all these facts will be waiting there for you later in life when you need to remember what the capital of China is. In the last 40 or 50 years, though, there's been a revolution in the way we conceptualize the way learning. So educational practice has really developed in the past 40 or 50 years as cognitive psychologists have begun to look at it. And one of the new educational models, actually not that new anymore, is Constructivism. And this was based off of the work of John Dewey and Jean Piaget. And basically, the idea is that as we learn things, we assimilate them into what we already know. Okay, so new knowledge comes in and we assimilate that to what we already know. But sometimes new knowledge completely doesn't fit, and we need to kind of break down that old structure and redo it. And this is called accommodation. All right, and so apparently we do this all the time. New information comes in, we develop a model, and then more information comes in and it breaks down, and we need to make up a new model. Apparently, this is happening all the time, both at a small scale and a large scale. So, how does this affect the history classroom? Well, the idea here is that students can't be told what to think and what to remember. They have to discover it for themselves. They need to assimilate that new knowledge and then accommodate knowledge occasionally and break down old structures. In other words, they have to be active learners. They have to be part of their own education. They can't be passive recipients. So we can't just throw facts out there. Facts needed to be embedded in a task. All right? That students actively engage in themselves. Now, along with the revolution in constructivism, there's also been a concern, and it's a concern related to it, is that we're not developing critical thinkers. If we're just telling students what to think all the time, students aren't learning to think for themselves. Now, critical thinking is a bit of a broad term, but I personally prefer one devised by two researchers, Norris and Enos. And basically, they define it as reasonable, reflective thinking that is focused on deciding what to believe or do. All right, so when we think critically, we're thinking about how to reasonably decide what we're going to think or what we're going to do. And this is very important because, especially nowadays with social media and the internet, we're bombarded with contradictory facts all the time. Now, if you've been told what to think, you're not going to know what to do with those facts. A lot of times, either in advertisement or the news, there's misleading claims. Well, if you haven't been taught how to wade through which claims to believe and which claims not to believe, then you may be led astray. Furthermore, in the media and on TV, there's all kinds of historical interpretations. A lot of these aren't entirely true. And so teaching students to be able to recognize these things will enable them to navigate through an increasingly complicated world. Well, all of this means that in the history profession, we should change the way we do things. The new model is the guide on the side rather than the sage on the stage. That is, we don't tell students what to think, but we give them the resources. We train them regularly in the skills at an appropriate level, and then we let them construct their own knowledge. We're there to help and improve their form, but we're not there to do the heavy lifting for them. We're not there to do the thinking for them. Now, part of this is training students to think like historians. History's actually pretty messy. The facts almost never speak for themselves. And if you've been exposed to it at all, you know that there's a lot of arguments and very little is agreed on. And so the new thinking is expose students to that. Traditionally, teachers have hid that from them. The textbook says this is the way it is. And you grow up thinking, well, that's the facts. But the idea is teach them that it's actually pretty messy, that there's all kinds of arguments and disputes in history. Teach them to wade through information like a historian does. After all, that's what other disciplines do, right? Nurses go to nursing lab where they practice being a nurse. Lawyers go to mock trial where they practice being a lawyer. But for some reason in the social sciences and the humanities, this hasn't been the case until now. Well, a lot of research has been done on this, and there are a variety of different skills that researchers have seized upon that historians use regularly. And there's different models, but for the most part, they agree with each other. And ideally, in the history classroom, educators are going to want to hit as many of these skills as possible, as often as possible. Because they're like anything else. You get better at doing them the more you do them. And they can be isolated to some degree. Just like in basketball, if you're a good shooter but a poor dribbler, you can practice dribbling a little bit more than shooting. But you generally want to incorporate them all into a practice, right? So that you can use them in a game. All right. Well, certain types of tasks enable us to hit as many skills as possible. All right, these are called historical inquiry tasks. And basically here, you're given a problem, you're given a variety of sources, and then you have to exercise your higher cognitive functions in order to be able to answer that. Usually they'll require a variety of historical thinking skills. So I've designed one for a potential history class on classical China. And so in this assignment, students are broken into a group of 4 or 5, and they are assigned a classical Chinese philosophical school, one representing the 3 major philosophies in classical China. So legalism, Taoism, and Confucianism. And they'll be given prompts to help them wade through the material, because that's important. And what they'll need to do is they'll need to convince the emperor or teacher to adopt their particular philosophy, to adopt the theories of their particular school as the main ideology of the empire. Now, the goal here is to learn about classical Chinese philosophy and classical Chinese government and China. But at the same time, the hope is that you'll practice historical thinking skills. So, for instance, one of the skills is sourcing. It's like how to read old documents, and that can be tricky. It's hard to wrap your mind around the way people thousands of years thought. Part of it is learning to contextualize and corroborate information. And part of it is to be able to put things in their larger historical context. Finally, since you're going to try to convince the emperor or teacher, you're going to be exercising the skills of argumentation. Now, as a follow-up to this, what I would like to do is I would like to have the other schools respond and then make a counter argument to the other school's argument, right? Because that's a whole different skill, right? To say, well, okay, yeah, what they said was true, but ours is better because. And so, to develop some real deep argumentation skills. And this is something you'd want to do over the course of the semester. Now, I also designed a second assignment. And this assignment is going to be based off of images. And so once again, students are going to be broken down into groups. And the goal here will be to look at Buddhist iconography. Now, iconography is a special type of it's a special type of symbolism that is often found in art. And so here, students will first get some background information on various types of iconography, basically different hand poses. There's different headgear that's worn, different ways, even the way that the leg is draped, and they'll have to identify various types of Buddhas. All right, and so let's see if I can get these Buddhas' names pronounced properly. There's Amitabha Buddha, Maitreya Buddha, and Bodhisattva. Okay, and I'm sure I mispronounced those to some degree, but those are the 3 basic types of Buddhas that are found. And so after getting some background information on these Buddhas and on the various iconography, they'll have to develop their skills in various historical thinking skills, like identification, identifying which Buddha we're looking at based on what they've already learned, and contextualizing. Okay, so that does it for my presentation. Thank you all for your attention, and I'll see you in class.